everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Build Breakdown series powered by Sparesbox. If you guys have only just tuned into this series, we've already done part one of the build breakdown. That was on the motor with Scott Mitchell Media. It's going to be up here, it's going to be up here, or down here. Otherwise, the link is going to be in the description below, so make sure you check it out. Today I will be introducing part two of the series where we'll be going to take a look into the suspension setup and discuss the components that make this S15 a competitive platform on track. Since the car was first built in 2015, it has undergone a number of major overhauls over the last 8 years, particularly around the suspension setup. The car first started off with the complete Driftworks catalogue, which included Driftworks knuckles, also known as uprights, a complete control arm kit from front to back, which included front and rear lower control arms, camber arms, tow arms, traction arms, as well as front caster arms. At the time, this was a really great setup. However, as the years went by, technology moved on and my driving style has also changed. So we have now made some minor upgrades to the suspension components on the car, as well as the rear subframe and front crossmember that holds these items to the chassis. So let's take a closer look at my current suspension setup in the S15. Starting at the front of the car, I'm running a version 2 Wisefab front lock kit and steering rack relocation. From my understanding, the first Wisefab lock kit was developed, engineered and tested by world champion James Dean. Nowadays, Wisefab is pretty much the go-to system for most comp drivers around the world, and to be honest, I really like how the car drives with this kit installed in the car. There is so much to cover around Wisefab and how it drives, so I'll dive deeper into the functionality of the system in a later video. But now I will list the main aspects of the system, and any questions you guys may have, drop it in the comments below and we can revisit in my upcoming Wisefab feature. Now the Wisefab kit consists of a one-piece lower control arm, a knuckle with Ackerman adjustment, multiple lock-stop adjustment settings, as well as longer tie rods with adapters to suit the platform. The V2 kit differs from the V1 kit as it allows for multiple areas of adjustment. You now have more flexibility to adjust your track, upper and lower caster angles, camber, tow angle, and Ackerman, which further allows you to be able to adapt this system to suit your driving style and preferences. The kit has a huge amount of usable lock, and it does allow you to drive very aggressively, whether you're at 30 degrees of lock or at over 65 degrees of lock, which allows drivers to have more control over a wider range of driving or lock angle. In using the kit, I have found there are some limitations to the wheel sizing you can run. I do run a fairly wide wheel and tyre combination using this kit, so for me that means two things. I need to run a lot of camber and a larger track width for clearance purposes. For instance, my wheels are an 18 by 9.5 with an offset of plus 10 to 15, whereas Wisefab recommend you run an 18 by 8 or an 18 by 9 with an offset of between 25 and 45 and a smaller tyre. However, I love the look of the car with larger wheels, so I've had to sacrifice driving performance over aesthetics, and at the end of the day, the car still drives really well. I was initially skeptical about using Wisefab and was pretty happy with my Part Shop Max setup from my previous comp cars. Some purists will say that you should learn to drift without the added performance benefits that a Wisefab setup brings. However, in a comp setting, competing against drivers with Wisefab, when you're not running a similar setup and when you're constantly winding on big angle at higher speeds, was becoming more and more challenging. Wisefab generally allows you a bigger margin for error when you wind on too much angle or when you make a mistake, so driving against competitors without it was becoming a big challenge, at least in my opinion anyway. The next main feature is the Wisefab steering rack relocation kit that I fitted into the factory OEM S15 crossmember. A strong steering rack relocation kit will give you the perfect balance between more lock and more control and help avoid to reduce steering bind. Through years of experience to setting up multiple drift cars, I have used an array of different steering rack relocation kits, including offset rack spacers, cut up and modified crossmembers, as well as steering rack spacers that move the rack forward without modifying the subframe. However, each of these upgrades only helped me reach around 30 mils of rack relocation, which was never enough with the lock system I was using at the time. In 2018, when Wisefab released their version 2 kit, I noticed the system had allowed you to completely change the crossmember by cutting it apart and welding in a prefabricated section that would give you around 45 mils of rack relocation. This extra amount is super helpful in enhancing the drivability of the car, especially when using an aggressive lock kit such as Wisefab. I highly recommend that even if you are not running Wisefab, look into this relocation kit, it might change your life. So next up we have the front sway bar system. The sway bar system is used to reduce sway or body roll in the car and stabilize the vehicle when thrown into a corner. I don't currently run a sway bar system, however this is something that we will be looking into trialing in the future, but for now I'm pretty happy with how the car drives without it. The version 2 Wisefab kit does allow you to adapt a sway bar system in the car, and GK Tech do offer a great aftermarket kit, which is what I'm holding right now. This allows you to modify it to suit your application. We did have this installed at one point, however we didn't really spend enough time on getting it to function correctly with the Wisefab kit and my wheel clearance, so this is something that we will address later on. And if anyone has successfully implemented another system using Wisefab, please let me know in the comments below. Now in terms of the front caster rod brackets, also known as the K-frame, we're running a standard S15 OEM K-frame bracket kit in the car. Most people would generally cut the plate off the bottom and weld in reinforcement plates, however, I've simply not got around to doing it yet, and the S15 K-frame brackets already have a reinforcement plate on the base of it, which seems to be working fine for the time being. I do recommend installing the GK Tech reinforcement kit, and this is something I'm probably going to do in the near future. Jumping over to the coilover system in the S15, this is a really important part of the car and often overlooked. Roughly 90% of car owners purchase an off-the-shelf coilover set, which in some applications is absolutely great. However, if you want to take your driving to that next level or even have a really good street or track setup, I think it is really important to have a good set of coilovers that is built specifically to suit your car. Previously to 2022, we were running a Part Shop Max Pro coilover set in the front and rear of the car. This year we've had a lot of assistance from Chris O'Brien at Shockworks, which has been a huge help in setting the car up and making it handle and perform better on track. In the S15, we are now running Shockworks' flagship monotube coilover system, which features their latest Neo technology. These Shockwork coilovers are a traditional one-way system which combines your compression and rebound adjustment in 12 simple turns. There is a lot of confusion around whether or not you should have a 1, 2 or 3-way dampening system in the car. For drifting, I think it's important to reduce the amount of adjustments that are needed to be made on the car unless you are really testing the car multiple times a month, multiple different tracks and under different conditions. As for spring rates, this is also another important factor in setting up the car correctly. This is one area that I have seen many drivers make mistakes, especially when purchasing an off-the-shelf kit for their street or drift car. Most kits only come with an 8 kg front and a 6 kg rear, or 10 front and an 8 rear, unless you request a custom set from your shop. These specs are great for an entry to intermediate level setup, or if you still have the standard engine and running gear installed. However, if you do upgrade your engine or running gear, you will need to change your spring rate so they can support a heavier driveline or to suit your design and driving conditions. So in the S15, we are running a 13 kg front and a 5 kg rear. The reason for the 13 kg front spring is because we are running a heavier motor than the traditional SR20 with a difference of around 70 to 80 kilograms. This 13 kg spring rate will help with steering control and overall driving performance. In addition to this, we don't run a front sway bar in the car with the Wisefab system, so running a heavier spring rate makes the front a little bit firmer to compensate for this. Moving on to the rear component of the coilover system, in the rear of the vehicle we don't have to focus solely on the weight of the engine, instead you need to focus on the balance of grip versus control. Therefore, I generally go anywhere from a 6 kg spring to a 4 kg spring in the rear depending on what track I'm driving at or what conditions I'm driving in. However, this really depends on what suspension system you are running in your car as well as your driving style. In addition to the Shockworks coilovers in the rear, we are running a complete Part Shop Max control arm catalogue. I really love the Part Shop Max system because they really have thought of everything. The system offers the perfect balance of strength, aesthetics and functionality. Just looking at PSM's control arms and knuckles, you can really tell they have spent a lot of time over-engineering and designing their products. Their lower control arms allow you to modify the track width with plenty of flexibility and adjustment. Another great aspect of this lower control arm is the design of the lower ball joint. PSM have used this ball joint on multiple arms across their range, which makes it super easy to replace when you do damage or bend one, especially when you smash one into a wall like the ones you find everywhere in D1NZ. The next component in the rear is the PSM drop knuckles, also known as the uprights. These are one of the major components in the back of the car as they really control how the car performs when you have modified the rear suspension height. The drop knuckles are largely responsible for correcting the geometry of the vehicle, which is the angle or location to which the suspension arms sit in relation to the vehicle. A drop knuckle allows you to run the vehicle at a lower ride height without impacting the angle at which your control arms sit, therefore giving you better drivability. Next we have the PSM camber arms and the toe arms. These arms will allow you to adjust the angle at which the wheel sits vertically and horizontally on the vehicle. Commonly, changing the ride height of your car will affect the angle at which the wheel sits. If the angle is not corrected by adjusting your camber arms or your toe arms, it will affect your grip, tyre wear and drivability. Another aspect to consider is that when you do lower the vehicle, your drive shafts might come into contact with the camber arm or it might foul on the chassis of the vehicle. Both of these possible failures have been ruled out in the design of the PSM system, allowing you to run the car as low as possible, which is the way I prefer to run this S15 setup. Next, we arrive at the traction rods, which aren't commonly upgraded unless you want to diversify your rear end adjustability. Adjusting these rear arms move your rear knuckles forward or backwards to further dial in your suspension geometry or curve. Personally, I extend my rear traction rods so they pivot the drop knuckles backward, and as a result generally reduces the amount of toe or camber change under vertical compression. PSM do have an upgraded toe control kit that they adapt to these rear knuckles, which is an upgrade that I have used in previous builds. However, with this build, I was looking to simplify the setup and have decided to leave it out for this time. Finally, holding all that gear together in the rear is a factory S15 subframe. The rear subframe has undergone minor modifications using the GK Tech reinforcement plates and the solid subframe bush upgrade. This helps strengthen the mounting points where everything connects to the vehicle and stops any flex where the subframe connects to the chassis of the car. I find that it is super important as these items improve not only the strength of your mounting points that are holding all your suspension arms together, but also the drivability and performance in reducing any reflex or any movement in the back, which as a result improves the driving feel and the overall performance of the vehicle. And that, my friends, concludes our chat featuring the suspension setup of my newest S15 package. I know this was a lot of information to take in, however our next videos will feature more on the Wisefab setup and how it handles, how to set up your suspension kit for optimum performance and much more. So like and subscribe to keep up to date, and I'll see you guys very soon back in this workshop.